Well, good evening and welcome to Who Are We as United Methodists? This is what a beautiful day we've had. This fall weather is so gorgeous. The leaves around us are changing and falling, and it's really looking like a beautiful fall. Today was a little warmer than it has been. I was honored but also saddened to do a graveside service today. Charlie Hall, a member of our church who was 89 years old, passed away, and Charlie had served in the Army and in Korea. And so I went and did kind of a combination memorial service and graveside service at National Cemetery. And that is such a beautiful place. It was more beautiful today because of all the flags that were out. Tomorrow is Veterans Day, where we honor those who have served in our military and those who continue to serve. And so lots of flags out, and this beautiful fall day, it was a glorious sight. We did our community cafe tonight. I saw John Ellis on. I bet Mary is there with him, and they came through and got meals. Carol Millard came through, and I bet Greg is on and maybe having enjoyed a meal. I think I saw Pam Bonine come through. I know I did. I haven't seen her on yet. But anyhow, a number of you came through and got meals tonight. And we didn't quite set a record, but we came close. We had 301 was the latest count that I heard, which is really good. That continues to be a really popular ministry, and one that I'm looking forward to after the first of the year, getting to, thank you, Greg. We'll, hopefully after the first of the year, we'll get to bring the community indoors and we can eat together. If you are looking for a way to serve at Christ Church this next week, I've got something for you. This is the week for the Genevieve bond sale. And if you don't know how that works, a member of our church owns the Genevieve Bond store, and she gives our youth all the merchandise that she can't sell. Her name is Kelly Jolly, and she is a wonderful, generous, giving person. And so we store that surplus merchandise. It's all wonderful stuff. And then about this time of the year, we have a big sale. And the proceeds of that go to pay a big chunk of the expense so that our youth choirs can go to places like the Dominican Republic for their mission trip. They didn't get to go last year. We didn't get to have the sale last year, but we've got a lot of merchandise, and that's where the service comes in. This coming Sunday at 1:30, we're going to meet at the church. We're going to take the church bus, and we're going to head over to a storage unit that's right off East Brainerd Road, and we're going to load that bus up. And in fact, some of us, myself included, will be driving our pickup trucks. And we've got enough for probably that bus and 2 or 3 pickups and a minivan or 2. And then we'll haul it back to the church and we'll unload all that. And then Christina Malone will have lots of folks who help to set that up in the gym. And that work will take place all through the week. And then on Friday and Saturday, there'll be this huge Genevieve bond sale. And then Saturday at noon, the sale is over, and folks like me show up and help pack it up and whatever's left over and take it back to the storage unit. So if you're looking for a way to serve, this coming Sunday at 1:30 would be a good time to do that. We can use lots of help. Now, let's get into our material. Tonight, we're going to go beyond the beliefs, the theology, the doctrine of the United Methodist Church. And we're going to talk about what I call practices. There's good theology and doctrine behind our practices, but this is kind of how we do stuff. And this is a wonderful night. If you're wondering about something and I'm not covering it, then chime in, put a comment up, and I'll try to keep an eye on my phone. It's on a little tripod right in front of me. You may notice that I'm at home again tonight. I didn't have to do homework help. Last week I did Algebra 2 with a young girl, and tonight I was told that nobody needed help. So at least the kids that I've been helping. So anyhow, I got to run home after Community Cafe. I was talking one day at the church with a woman who had been Baptist and had come to the United Methodist Church, was visiting with us, and she was thinking about joining the church. And she commented and said that she was surprised to learn that my title as an associate pastor, we only have 2 associates. The other one is Debbie Stokes. She's Minister of Congregational Care. And my title, my business card says Minister of Evangelism and Care. And she was so impressed that in the United Methodist Church, there would be someone with a title with evangelism on it. Her perspective on Methodism was that we do not do much evangelism. Now, I want to ask you that. Why would that be? Why would somebody coming to the United Methodist Church, not being real familiar with what we do, what our practices are, why would somebody coming to the Methodist Church from another denomination say, what? You guys do evangelism? In fact, you've got an associate pastor whose main area of focus is doing evangelism, reaching out to the community to help people find Christ and help people who are worshiping at the church to profess faith in Christ, to join the church. She went ahead and joined the church. In fact, she volunteered very soon after joining to say, David, if you can use my help in evangelism ministries, which I could, here I am. I love reaching out to help people find a deeper relationship with Christ. So help me out here. Why would somebody be surprised coming into the United Methodist Church, not knowing much about us, be surprised by that? Or perhaps knowing some things about us that aren't always prevalent. Somebody post something here. Why would a person be surprised that a church would have a pastor with a focus in evangelism? Okay, Michael says, well, we don't meet in tents, but we do profess the word. We unfortunately are not known these days as being an evangelical church. We started as an evangelical movement in the Church of England. We were extremely evangelical. Evangelical just means spreading the message, reaching out with the word, reaching new people for Christ, and that's what the Methodist Church was in the States. The Methodist Church was really strong on evangelism. It exploded under the circuit riders because they were reaching out. People in the communities were reaching out. People were sharing the good news. But what's happened over the last few decades is the Methodist Church has become known more for our work in social justice and social issues than in reaching people for Christ. I think some churches have kind of lost their focus. So there's nothing at all wrong with social justice issues. We need to work on that. Part of the vows we take as a member is we will resist evil and injustice wherever they present themselves. But we also take a vow that we will support the church through our witness. So we're supposed to reach out in evangelism. And this lady, I thought it was so cool that she was impressed and wanted to be part of a church that put an emphasis on evangelism. Let's get into our lesson for tonight, which is going to include things like, why do we have bishops? What do bishops do? How do you get ordained as a pastor in the Methodist Church? And what are the different types of ordination or licensing? Some people get licensed. What does it mean for clergy to be itinerant? How do you get appointed to a church? What do we mean by the ministry of the baptized? How is a church connectional? The Methodist Church is connectional instead of being congregational. We're congregations, but we're connected together. We'll talk a little bit about small groups. Let's start with connectional versus congregational and bishops. As the early church spread in the 1st and 2nd century, it just was like a wildfire. It went out from Jerusalem across Israel, north to Antioch, south into North Africa, and then spread west across the Roman Empire to Rome and beyond. In no time at all, it had spread all the way to England. So, as the church spreads, initially the apostles were there leading. We don't know where all the apostles were. We know where the apostle Paul went, but we have church traditions about, Thomas went to India, but we don't know that. But where the apostles went, they took Jesus' teachings with them. The apostles lived and died. And then another generation came along. And with the church dispersed in so many different places, an interesting thing developed. In each city, someone, a pastor, a leader, stepped up and became kind of the overseer for that city. For lack of a better word, I'll call them bishops. At that time, the New Testament uses words like elder, deacon, overseer, and the word overseer is one that a lot of churches interpret as bishops. So these bishops weren't really appointed by anybody, but they were well respected. They were very knowledgeable. They were good leaders. Paul appointed overseers in the cities. If you think about the church at Philippi, that wasn't one house church. That was a bunch of house churches. And so in the city of Philippi or the region around that, there would have been a bishop. In Carthage in North Africa, there was a bishop. In Rome, there was a bishop. And these people were, again, they weren't formally appointed. They didn't wear special robes. They were just recognized as being the leader of the church in their city. And their primary role was to make sure that all the pastors, all the preaching, all the teaching that was going on in their city, their purview, was orthodox. And if somebody got out kind of in left field, it was the bishop's job to bring them in and say, here's what we teach about that. Well, as the church continued to grow and things got a little bit more complex, bishops started wondering, am I being consistent with other bishops? And so, this was the days before texting and email and internet. And so they would travel sometimes to another city to converse with their fellow bishop. And after a while, they started to have meetings. They called them councils. And so they would come together and say, one of the things that we're discussing in my city that we're having a little trouble with is how to interpret this. What do you all do? And so they'd compare notes, they would debate the issue, and they'd decide, for all of us, we should do this. That's how bishops really got going. And then the Roman Catholic Church came along, and they took that loose-knit structure of bishops in the Christian church whenever Christianity became the official religion of Rome, and they made those bishops a very hierarchical position. They gave them special vestments, and they gave them not only the title bishop, but they had other titles, cardinal and other things. And so the Roman Catholic Church developed a hierarchy that included bishops, doing pretty much what bishops had done before. It should be no surprise that in the Church of England, which formed right out of the Catholic Church, that there was the head of the Church of England was the Archbishop of Canterbury, and under him were bishops in each of the towns. So the Church of England, in many respects, copied the structure of the Roman Catholic Church. Then a group came along that were called Anabaptists, and they were radical Protestants. They hated anything having to do with the Catholic Church, and so they did away with the title in their role. They said that overseers or bishops were an invention of the Roman Catholic Church, and so they instead said their churches would not report to a bishop. They would be independent. They would be autonomous. So each congregation in the Anabaptist church. And by the way, the Anabaptist church meant baptize again. Anna is again. And so they were rebaptizing people who were baptized as babies. They were rebaptizing people who were baptized by people that they felt like were only authorized by the Catholic Church. And they're not forebears or precedents of the current Baptist Church. But anyhow, now, when Wesley started his Methodist movement, he had a decision. Do I make these guys connectional or do I make them congregational? What do you think he did? Well, what did Wesley decide for the Methodist Church, the Methodist movement? Are we to be connected together in a network of churches, or are we to be separate individual islands in our local churches? Somebody jump in and answer that for me. Connection. Thank you. That's exactly right. Wesley said, I want all my churches to be connected together. In the Church of England, they were connected together, and he kind of copied that model. Whenever Wesley saw that, okay, the colonies have won their independence, they don't want to be led by anybody in England. Yes, Gala says we reach more together. That's one of the real beauties of being connected. You guys are all chiming in here telling me connected churches, connectionalism. When Wesley saw that, okay, the colonies are now the United States of America, they don't want to report to me as the head of their movement. So Wesley sent Thomas Coke to America. And before Coke left, Wesley ordained him. He was already a pastor in the Church of England. He was a Methodist. And Wesley ordained him as an overseer. Another term for that is superintendent. And he told him, as soon as you get to America, have a conference, you now can ordain pastors. So all these lay pastors that can't serve communion and baptize, you can ordain them and convey the right for them to do the sacraments. And as soon as you get to America, you should ordain Francis Asbury, who had stayed in the colonies through the Revolutionary War as a pastor. You should ordain him as an overseer. They did that. Christmas Conference of 1784, Asbury was ordained an overseer. Within 2 weeks, Thomas Coke and Francis Asbury, were being referred to with the title not overseer, but bishop. So here the model of the Church of England has come into the Methodist Church, very separate now. We'd broken away from the Church of England, but we've got that structure of bishops. Today, the United Methodist Church is a worldwide church. We all come together. Africa, South America, Europe, Asia, Philippines, North America, we all come together through the General Conference. It meets once every 4 years. It's the only group that can change our doctrine or our theology. And that is how the worldwide United Methodist Church is connected and governed. Within each location, in the United States, there are jurisdictions. So we're part of the Southeastern jurisdiction. It's a little bit like being part of the Southeastern Conference. There's the Northwestern, the Northeastern. There's all these different jurisdictions in the United States. In other countries, their groups are called central conferences. And then underneath the jurisdictions are annual conferences. You all probably know that we're part of Holston Annual Conference. Holston Annual Conference includes Southwest Virginia, East Tennessee, and a little bit of Northeast Georgia. Our bishop has just changed. It was Dindy Taylor. Now it's Deborah Wallace Pageant. And she's the bishop over the North Alabama as well as Holston Conference. I've met her, had a chance to chat with her back in the summer. And she's coming to our district next Monday night. All the pastors are getting together for a meeting. And Bishop Wallace Pageant will be there to speak with us and learn more about our district. Within the Holston Conference, there's something like 872 churches and 9 districts. We're in what's called the Scenic South District. It used to be known as the Chattanooga District. We changed our names to things that are a little bit more commercial or sound like maybe the Chamber of Commerce named them. We're the Scenic South, and each district is overseen by a superintendent, and our superintendent is Reed Schill. Now, what are the advantages of being connectional? Pam Bonan, I think, is the one who said, or maybe it was Gala, that said, we can do more. I think it was Gala. We can reach more when we are connected. That is exactly right. What else? What's another advantage of being a connected church? Part of a district, part of a conference, part of a jurisdiction, part of the general conference that is worldwide, besides just making us a larger denomination. What are some advantages? There are some disadvantages, and I want you to be thinking about both. My next question is going to be, so what are some disadvantages of being a connectional church? Baptist churches align sometimes under a convention like the Southern Baptist Convention. Okay. Greg says a broader reach with consistent message. There's 2 things in that. The broader reach, we're reaching across the world. We have a consistent message. Our theology is consistent. In Africa, they have the same theology as we have in Chattanooga. It's all in our book of discipline. Another great advantage of the connection is in doing mission work. It is incredible what our conference, Holston Conference, 872 churches, it's incredible what we can do with food buckets and cleaning supplies and things like that when there's a need in the world. Every year we'll send things to Zimbabwe, some years to Liberia. And it's more than any church can do. And in fact, oftentimes churches wouldn't even attempt some of this stuff. But when churches come together, it makes it much easier, much more doable. So, and something else, when Greg says a consistent message, that consistency or continuity comes about because we have Methodist seminaries. We have our pastors are, as we go through the process of being ordained, we're asked similar questions, and there are wrong answers to those questions. So yes, it gives us a larger reach. We keeps our messaging consistent. But what are some disadvantages? While you're thinking about that, I'll throw out another advantage of being connected. When a church needs help, oftentimes they can say, we need so-and-so, and another church in the connection will say, we can provide that. When Christ Church was a brand new church, we needed some money to buy chairs for the Sancta Gym. We needed some other things, and we put out the word, and churches gave us stuff. Churches in our district, even the conference, gave us a grant. I can remember as worship grew in the gym, we needed to expand the stage, and so we put together a grant request, and the conference gave us money that helped us to do that. Okay, Greg says it's slower to change, harder to get a consensus among leaders. We've been struggling over human sexuality as an issue without getting consensus among the leaders since 1972. You're right, Greg. It's when you've got that many people, that many different backgrounds, it's hard to make a change. Something else, you're not as autonomous. Okay, we got a consistent message, but it's because we don't get to roll our own. We don't get to kind of come up with our own message. So churches are less autonomous. And one more that you may not know about, in the United Methodist Church, the local church does not own buildings and property. We hold it in something called trust, but it's owned by the General United Methodist Church. And so that's that holds us together. It keeps us from saying, well, I think we're just going to separate. As long as their property is held in trust, we tend to stay there. Now, there are some things going on with this human sexuality issue. There's a protocol that would say if churches want to separate over that, we'll take away the trust clause for them and let them take their property and go. So, but that's not in the discipline at this point at all. I think it's much better to be part of a connection. I love getting to do ministry with churches in other parts of our conference, and the connection allows us to do that. Bishops, what do? What's their role? Well, they ordain clergy. They supervise, in our case, 9 district superintendents. The superintendents report to them. They chair the cabinet, which is the 9 district superintendents along with the bishop, and they're the ones who make appointments. We'll talk about appointments of pastors a little later. And they preside at annual conference. It's an annual meeting, lasts 3 or 4 days, and it's where we decide the business of Holston. They preside there. You might ask, well, how does somebody get to be a bishop? Most people who get to be a bishop say, you know, I'd kind of like to be a bishop, and they get elected as representatives to the general conference, to the jurisdictional conference, and in the jurisdiction here in the Southeast, for example, we elect new bishops. If there's 3 retirements coming and there's 3 openings, we elect 3 bishops. And they almost never are appointed to their home church. So if for example, about 12 years ago, Mary Virginia Taylor, Dindy Taylor, here in our conference, was elected bishop. She wasn't assigned to Holston. She was already a member of Holston. She was assigned to South Carolina. But something happened then that's very unusual. After she had served her 8 years, she was appointed or assigned to her home conference. That happens occasionally, but no one is ever elected. It's like, well, we need to run a candidate for bishop, so we'll have our own bishop. No, bishops come from other conferences within your jurisdiction. Let's talk about itinerancy. What does itinerancy mean? And by this, I'm talking about itinerancy of clergy. But that word applies to farmers. An itinerant farmer, an itinerant orchard worker. What is an itinerant? What does itinerancy mean? Somebody post that for me. What does itinerant mean? If I'm itinerant, that says something about what I do or how I do it. John Wesley was a huge proponent of the itinerancy. Okay, thank you, Lynn. We move around. We're a traveler. Yes, an itinerant farmer does something here, moves. Some farmers, thank you, Greg, travel from place to place. Some travel with the harvest. Well, that's itinerancy. Pastors are itinerant in that we are appointed. We're actually not members of a local church. We're members of the annual conference, and we are appointed to the church where the cabinet wants us to serve. So that's called the itinerancy. John Wesley did not want pastors staying in one place too long. Now, why would that be? Today we look at that and we say, well, that seems just a little bit crazy to be moving these people around all the time. Rick says, do you think this is still a good idea? We're going to talk about that, Rick. Good question. Wesley thought it was a wonderful idea, and it was in his time. Why would Wesley say, you need to move preachers every little bit? He would say, I don't want them staying in the same place too long, and why would that be? Help me out here. There's always a good reason for stuff you do, but as Rick is pointing out, or at least as he's asking, is it still a good idea? I do think it's a good idea, but I like that we're letting people stay much longer. The church should be a group of believers, not the pastor. That's right. The church are the believers, the members. Pastors should be viewed as servants of the people and also pastors of the people, and so they come and go. Wesley was afraid that if a preacher stayed, can you as an associate pastor be moved? Absolutely, yes. Wesley was afraid that if a preacher stayed in a place too long, he would stop being prophetic. We're supposed to preach what God would have us preach and not what the people want to hear. And Wesley would say, you can't stay too long, you get comfortable, and people start telling you, well, we don't like to hear about money, so you stop preaching about money. And people say, we don't like to hear, and so we stop preaching on that. And Wesley would say, no, move them, and they can remain prophetic. Something has happened. When I was a kid growing up in the Methodist church, we were part of a small church, but we'd have a new preacher about every 3 years. Yes, Greg says they might become complacent, sort of rest on their laurels, and that is a bad thing. So, as I say, when I was a kid, we'd get a new preacher every 3 years, sometimes more often. Some of those were really good, some of them not so much. Some of them were really suited to our church. They were gifted for our church. Some of them were not. And the Methodist church started noticing something. Churches that were doing well, that were taking in lots of new members, that were doing a lot of baptisms, a lot of new people were finding Christ in their church. They noticed the pastors had tended to be there for a while. And the church said, could there be a connection here? Maybe continuity of leadership is a good thing. Rick says it may be really hard, especially where there's a spouse who has a job. And Rick, you're exactly right. So what's happening now is if the way the process works, the district superintendent will ask the pastor, would you like to stay this year? I have a meeting with the district superintendent coming up first week in December, and I've already gotten a form to fill out that says, David, do you want to stay at Christ Church? And the chair of our staff parish relations committee will receive a similar form that says, do you want your pastors, Nathan, Debbie, and David, to stay at your church, or are you ready for a change with either of those? And if the staff parish relations committee and the pastor says, we think we'd like to just leave things alone for this year, then they tend to just leave things alone. If either one, the pastor or the church, says, we think it's time for a move, then the district superintendent says, well, let's sit and talk about that. What's causing you to say that, etc. We have been a church since 1984. I believe that's 37 years. We've only had 4 senior pastors. So we've benefited from that continuity of leadership that's starting to take place so much more now. That's a good thing. Rick, I think the way people are appointed and assigned is a wonderful system. The church doesn't have to appoint a search committee and go looking. When the time comes, a pastor is appointed. But I celebrate that we're asked, do you want to go? And if you want to stay and the church wants you to stay, and things are working well, then you tend to get to stay. With a couple of our moves of clergy, one in particular, our first senior pastor was a guy named Steve Salee, was an awesome leader, but Jerry Anderson was retiring up at Cokesbury United Methodist Church, and that was an awesome move for Steve. It was a move from our church at that time probably had 1,200 members. Cokesbury had 1,800 members, so that was a huge promotion for Steve, and he'd been with us 13 years, and so it was fine to move him. But anyhow, that's how it works. And I plan to tell the district superintendent, just leave me where I am again, please. I'm asked this every now and then, David, would you like to have your own church? And the answer is, would I get to help as many people join the church as I do at Christ Church, or would I get to help as many people dig into their faith and perhaps profess their faith in Christ? And the answer is usually, okay, just stay at Christ Church and keep doing what you're doing. I love this appointment and hope I get to keep it for a long, long time. or until the church is ready to boot me out. So that's how we get appointed. Forms of clergy. And Rick, you had a good question. And another really key point that Rick made there is oftentimes spouses work. And so it's hard if a pastor is in Chattanooga and the cabinet says, well, why don't you move up to Southwest Virginia? Thank you, Rick. I appreciate that compliment. I really do. But if the bishop says, I think we want to move you up to Southwest Virginia, the spouse may have trouble finding a job in accounting or bookkeeping or engineering or whatever the spouse does for a living, and it's disruptive to families. The kids are pulled out of school, et cetera, et cetera. So people aren't moved just for the sake of moving them. They get moved when somebody retires and there's a move up. They get moved when it's time. Thanks, Greg. You guys are way too kind, except for that comment about Becky. I'll agree with you there. The forms of clergy. I need to pick up the pace here. I'm taking too long. There's ordained elder, and that's what Nathan Malone is. That's what Debbie Stokes is. Most people who are ordained elders come out of college. They go to seminary. They get a master's in divinity. And Rick says a lot of times both are pastors. That's true more today than ever. And the cabinet tries to honor that so that they appoint both of them in the same city. I know some clergy couples here in the scenic South District. They've moved churches, but they've stayed close enough together that they can, they can both be here and it not be a handicap for them. So I know they appreciate the way the cabinet works with them on that. So I was saying ordained people usually come out of college, they go to seminary, they go through the process to become commissioned as a provisional pastor, 3 years as that, and then you go through another part of the process, you're ordained. John Wesley had this practice of using lay people as preachers and pastors, and he would take them and train them himself. He'd give them his books, have them read books, he'd get them together for classes. And we, interestingly enough, have continued that. It's called the Pastor's Course of Study. And so you can do that and become licensed as a pastor. I was a licensed local pastor. I went to Candler and took about 2/3 of what's required for the Masters of Divinity. And I got a license. The license is good for 1 year. So it's kind of like getting a driver's license for a year and then having to go in and redo your license. So when I finished my course of study down at Candler, I took the next step, which is to become an associate member of conference. And when you're an associate member of conference, which you go through pretty much the same process of being ordained, you answer the same questions, you do board interviews, you do all kinds of stuff. And when you're an associate member of the conference, it means that you don't have to go every year to get your license. You're licensed for life. You're guaranteed an appointment. You're also expected to move if the bishop requests that you move. So anyhow, I went through that process, and I am an associate. And then that says I have all the same credentials as I would if I were an elder. I can serve the sacraments, do weddings, and all that. The only difference really that you'll see is you'll see Nathan and Debbie wearing stoles. Those stoles are a symbol of ordination. They're placed there by the bishop. When I got my license, I got this thing with a cross on it, and so I don't wear a stole on my robe. Let's see. Another type of pastor is a deacon, and Mary Thompson, who was our minister of missions, is a deacon. We had a youth director, Drew McCauley, who went away and went to seminary, became a deacon, and then Drew decided he wanted to be an elder. Deacons typically aren't in charge of a church, but they serve in a ministry as part of a church, like minister of missions, or in his case, director of youth. that's enough on clergy, unless you all have questions. We believe in the Methodist Church, as in a lot of churches, that there is something called the ministry of the baptized. And that means that everybody, when they are baptized, receive gifts. Everybody, spiritual gifts. And we have a responsibility to find out what our gifts are and put those gifts to work. And whenever we find a need that meets our gift, then that's called ministry when we serve. And in the Methodist Church, we believe everyone should be in ministry. It's called the ministry of the baptized. It's not the ministry of the clergy. Clergy are just lay people who are set aside to do ministry as a vocation. But all of us, people will ask me, they used to ask me this when I was in the course of study, so did you miss your call early in life? And my answer was always, no, I did not miss my call. My call changed. My call for 40 years was to serve as a layperson, and I tried my best to respond to that call and serve in different ways as a layperson. As I approached retirement, it seemed to make sense, and God seemed to be calling me to do the ministry as a vocation, as a new vocation, a new second career. So we do a lot of things in the Methodist Church to encourage people, to equip people, to train people. You may have heard of certified lay servants. There are special courses that you can take to become a lay servant or a lay speaker. You may know that we have, at Christ Church, we've got 13 certified lay ministers, and that requires some additional training. But Debbie Stokes is our minister of congregational care, and she's got 7 certified lay ministers on a team who do hospital visitation. We can't do that now with COVID, so they make phone calls. But, you know, Judy Driggins has Monday, and I could go through the whole week and tell you each certified lay minister has a day of the week. And then and of course, Debbie does a lot of visits and calls herself. But that's just an example of how there's so little that only clergy can do. Lay people are gifted to do the ministry of the church. And that's why we only have a senior pastor and 2 associates. The ministry of the church itself belongs to the members, to the laity. And I'd like to see, Nathan says this a lot, that he'd like to see everybody with 2 ministries. One inside the church, and that may be singing in the choir, it may be serving as an usher, it may be teaching Vacation Bible School, whatever. One ministry in the church, one ministry outside in the community. And that may be serving as a screener at Volunteers in Medicine. It may mean mentoring a prisoner at Walker State. It may mean going down to the Bethlehem Center. Whatever we do, inside the church, outside the church. A lot of people have way more than those 2, but having one in and one out is a really good balance. John Wesley, I'll close with this. John Wesley was so big on organizing what he called bands and classes. And those classes, those class meetings were just terribly important in the organization of the church. When somebody responded to his sermon and says, I'd like to be a Christian, he'd say, well, let's come join this class. And then I'll baptize you. And so he started small groups way back in the 1700s, and today we try to have as many small groups as we can. We have them on Sunday morning called Sunday school classes, but we have women's circles and men's small groups and all kinds of, this is a small group in a way. We can't have as good a fellowship online, but it's in a way it's one of those small groups, and we have tons of those at the church. You'll see books written today about the importance in this culture of small groups. Well, guess what? 250 years ago, John Wesley saw that they were important in his time as well. That's kind of an upper level, 30,000-foot view of, okay, what are some of our practices? Why do we do things the way we do? Why do preachers get moved around some? If the church needs a new pastor, how do you get one? How do you get ordained and those things? Why do you have bishops? What does it mean to be connected? Those are all key things that sort of set Methodists apart. Not totally, but to some extent. If you want to know more about, this is like coming to the end of a TV program. It says, if you want to know more about tonight's topic, if you do, then by all means, our discipline is chock full of this kind of information. But I mentioned a book by Scott Jones early on called United Methodist Doctrine from the Extreme Center. That's a great book to learn about what Methodists believe and why we practice some of the things we do. Next week, we're going to do something a little different. We're going to talk about Christ Church. And I'll tell you just a little bit of history, how we got started with the merger. But I'll also talk with you about some of our emphasis, why we do certain things in worship. How do we do some of the things we do in evangelism, discipleship? Why don't we have a building fund? And we'll talk a little bit about some of that stuff that maybe you're wondering about with Christ Church. It'll be a refresher for some of you, and for some of you it may be brand new. Well, as I always say, we're out of material, and it looks like we're out of time. So I'm gonna sign off and wish each of you a good night. It's been good to see your names pop up as you have joined us in the study tonight, asked and answered questions. Appreciate your presence. Good night.